Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Characters, Summary, Analysis. Hello and welcome to the discourse. Fahrenheit 451 is a fictional dystopian novel by American author and dramatist Ray Bradbury, published in 1953. The story depicts a future American society where free thoughts, expression, and books are outlawed. Bradbury wrote the book during the Second Red Scare period, also known as the McCarthy Era, when people in America suffered the political repression and persecution of left-wing individuals and a campaign spreading fear of alleged communist and Soviet influence on American institutions and of Soviet espionage in the United States. Bradbury was also inspired by the incidences of book burning in Nazi Germany. Bradbury claimed he wrote the book because he was concerned about the threat of thought control and restriction over freedom of speech in the United States. The novel stands against censorship and defends literature as necessary to the humanity of individuals and civilization. In 1948, Bradbury's short story Bright Phoenix was published that tells the story of a librarian who confronts a chief censor who burns books. In 1951, he published another short story, The Pedestrian, which talked about a society in which citizens are expected to watch television as a leisurely activity. A common man, the pedestrian, decides to go for a nighttime walk in his neighborhood and is harassed and detained by the police. Bradbury combined the elements of both short stories to write another short novel, The Fireman, published in 1951. He continued exploring the dystopian theme of his stories to produce his magnum opus Fahrenheit 451, published in 1953. Characters of Fahrenheit 451. Guy Montag is the protagonist of the novel. He is a 30-year-old married guy who works for the government as a fireman. His job is to burn books and the houses where they are illegally kept. Initially, he is a loyal fireman committed to his work. However, some instances instigate him to question the nature of his job. He begins feeling a conflict regarding his job. This inner conflict makes him feel apathy for his wife, job, and the society in which he lives. Mildred Montag, or Millie, is the wife of Guy Montag. She is addicted to sleeping pills, absorbed in the shallow dramas played on her television and seashell radio, and indifferent to the oppressive society around her. She epitomizes the shallowness and complacentness of society that Montag comes to despise. Clarice McLellan is a teenage girl just 1 month short of her 17th birthday. Guy Montag is attracted to her because of her inquisitive nature. She is outgoing, naturally cheerful, unorthodox, and intuitive. Her classmates and teachers do not like her because she is too curious and asks why instead of how. She disappears without a trace, and when Montag questions about her, Millie tells him that she was hit by a speeding car and her family left and place immediately after the accident. Montag doubts that Clarice might have been assassinated. Captain Beatty is the antagonist of the novel. He is the manager of the firehouse where Montag works. He is loyal to the authorities and often lectures Montag, trying to prevent him from succumbing to the appeal of books. Professor Faber is an aging retired intellectual in a world with no place for such people. Faber greatly disapproves of the dehumanized, oppressive society in which he lives. He prefers living discreetly rather than protesting or attempting to change the world. He helps Montag in clarifying his conflict regarding his job. Later on, he also helps in avoiding being caught by the mechanical hound. Faber escapes the atomic bomb as he had planned to catch an early bus out of the city. Granger is the leader of a group of intellectuals living discreetly who help Montag. The old woman is one of the victims of the fireman's job. When Montag goes to burn her books and the house, she decides to stay within the house and burn herself to death among her treasured books. Black and Stoneman are colleagues of Guy Montag. They are devoted firemen who mindlessly follow authority. Mrs. Phelps and Mrs. Bowles are the housewives and friends of Millie, sharing his interest in the television and her simplistic outlook on life. Summary of Fahrenheit 451. The novel is set in a futuristic American society in the 24th century. Technological advancement has reached such an extent that nearly all buildings were made with fireproof materials and firemen preventing fires were no longer necessary. The government then turned the firemen into officers of society's peace of mind. Instead of putting out fires, they were charged with starting them, specifically to burn books, which were condemned as sources of confusing and depressing thoughts that complicated people's lives. The story is divided into three parts. The first part is titled The Hearth and the Salamander. Hearth is a place in homes where people will have open fire to produce heat and prepare food. Salamander, on the other hand, is an attractive amphibian. The novel begins as Guy Montag returns from his duty of burning a hidden collection of books. In the future, books are totally banned, and firemen are those who put fire to the books and other possessions of those who keep illegal books. Montag is happy after completing his work as he feels it is a pleasure to burn. After his duty hours, he returns home where he meets a young girl who lives in his neighborhood. She introduces herself as Clarice McLean and says that everybody thinks she is crazy. Montag finds her very energetic and inquisitive. He is astonished by her questions, which prompts him to think and question himself. She discusses abstract issues such as happiness, satisfaction, purpose, love, and much more. Montag tries to ignore her questions, but he finds himself prompted to ponder more on these subjects. After reaching home, he finds that his wife Millie has taken an overdose of the prescribed sleeping pills. He wonders if Millie attempted suicide. He calls for emergency and health workers to visit his home to save his wife. As he tries to sleep, he begins thinking about the questions raised by Clarice about life. He feels a certain discontent within himself. He feels disturbed by the fact that his wife, who appears normal, conventional, and happy, tried to kill herself. The next morning, he tries to ask why Mildred attempted suicide, but she is not interested in any discussion. She completely declines that she took an overdose of sleeping pills. Rather, she claims that she went to a wild party and woke up hungover. She ignores Montag and begins preparing for a new script she was given for a television interview. Her disenchantment frustrates Montag as he leaves for the firehouse. On his way to work, he again meets Clarice, who begins a discussion. She further raises innocent questions that he never thought about, such as what is the taste of rain droplets and what dandelions represent. Her enthusiasm offers relief to Montag. He continues to meet Clarice almost every day. Clarice tells him that she is sent to therapy because she does not enjoy the normal activities of life and prefers to be outside and have conversations. After reaching the firehouse, he receives an alarm that an old woman has a stash of hidden literature. Montag and his two colleagues, Black and Stoneman, visit the old woman's house. The woman refuses to give up her library, and the firemen break in and begin to tear the house apart. Montag warns the lady that she should move outside as they are going to burn her library. The old woman refuses to go out and opts to get burned with her loved books. Montag is startled by her adamance. He wonders why are these books so important for the lady. In the chaos, Montag steals a copy of the Bible on impulse while the old woman sets herself and her books on fire. Montag feels that perhaps the happiness he lacks can be found in books. The sight of the old woman burning to her death disturbs him deeply. After reaching home, he hides the Bible and thinks about the old woman. He asks Millie if she remembers where they met for the first time. None of them could remember their first meeting. Millie informs him about Clarice's death in an automobile accident. Disturbed by the death of the old woman and by the news of Clarice's death, Montag decides to take a sick leave the next day and does not go to work. He tells Millie that he is not willing to work as a fireman anymore. Mildred panics over the thought of not being able to afford their home and the large wall-sized televisions if he leaves the job. She then sees Montag having a book. His senior officer, Captain Beatty, visits him at his home. Montag feels that Captain Beatty somehow knows about the book he took and hid from the old woman's library as Beatty delivers a long lecture on the history of censorship, the development of mass media, the dumbing down of culture, the rise of instant gratification, and the role of firemen as society's official censors, judges, and executors. Millie tries to point out that Montag has a book by lifting the pillow under which he had hidden the book, but Montag stops her. Millie then asks Captain Beatty what will happen if a fireman himself has kept some book. Beatty says it's okay for a fireman to keep a book for 24 hours out of natural curiosity, so long as he returns it in the next day. When Beatty leaves, Montag shows Mildred 20 books, including a Bible that he has been hiding in the house. He feels that their lives are falling apart and that the world does not make sense, and hopes some answers might be found in the books. Montag and Mildred try to read the books. The second part is titled The Sieve and the Sand. Millie tries to read the Bible but finds it difficult and soon gives up as she never read any book. She asks Montag to destroy the books immediately to ensure their safety. Montag then decides to take the help of an old retired English professor, Faber, whom he had met in a park. Montag decides to visit Faber to gain more understanding about books and his recurrent thoughts. When Faber notices Montag in front of his house, he gets frightened that Montag came to burn his books at home. However, Montag shows him the Bible he stole. Montag asks him to help him in reading the book. Faber says that these are difficult times as the threat of an atomic war is impending. Faber agrees to teach him how to read and he gives Montag a seashell radio so they can communicate with one another. When Montag returns home, he finds that two of Millie's friends, Mrs. Phelps and Mrs. Bowles, are at home and the three women are watching television. Montag is disgusted by his wife and with her friends. He wonders why are they not worried about the impending atomic war that may destroy the whole human civilization. Montag abruptly puts the television off and tries to entertain the women by reading a poem titled Dover Beach. However, this frightens the women and Mrs. Phelps and Mrs. Bowles leave Millie's house immediately. Millie too gets annoyed by Montag. Montag fears he may face consequences and decides to hide all the books he stole in his backyard. When Montag visits the firehouse for his work, he submits a book to Captain Beatty to dissuade Captain Beatty's suspicion about him stealing the books. Captain Beatty tells him that once he too was an enthusiastic reader but soon learned how harmful books can be. He then lectures more anti-book, anti-intellectual rhetoric. The firemen are called to an alarm and Montag is dismayed to discover that it is his own house that is to be burned. His wife Millie reported him. The third part is titled Burning Bright. This time, Captain Beatty accompanies Montag, Black, and Stoneman. Captain Beatty orders Montag to burn his hidden books and all other possessions in each room of his house. Montag tries to use the salamander, the fire-throwing machine that can immediately burn his house, but Captain Beatty insists that Montag must use the flamethrower, a less powerful machine that burns slowly. This further pains Montag. After burning all his books and possessions, he confronts Captain Beatty, who chides him for hiding and reading books and thus disobeying the authority. The two men get into a scuffle and Montag decides to use the flamethrower against Captain Beatty. Montag noticed that Beatty did not oppose or try to save himself and got burned alive. Montag realized that Captain Beatty was not happy with his life and wished to die and purposefully incited Montag to kill him. He decides to run away. He takes some books and hides them at Black's house to incriminate him and then reaches Faber's house to get his help. Faber says that he cannot help him much because soon a mechanical hound will be set loose to catch Montag. He then tells him the way to escape down the river where he will get some help. Montag helps Faber in getting rid of all the traces of him and then runs away to the river. A mechanical hound pursues him but he loses his trail as he dives and swims down the river. Meanwhile, Faber decides to run away as the atomic war is looming. He goes to St. Louis to ask a former printer he knows to print some books. After swimming for long, Montag leaves the river. In the wild, he meets a group of former writers, clergymen, and academics by the riverbank. These are drifters, the protesters against the authority who have been outcasted. they take Montag to their leader Granger. Montag learns that they failed to save books, though each of them has memorized at least one book to carry its knowledge into the future. As Montag studies with them, bombers fly overhead and drop nuclear bombs on the city. The drifters are far enough away to survive. The next day, Granger tells them about the legendary phoenix that rose from the ashes and muses that humans can do the same, except with the knowledge of their own mistakes to guide them. The group then begins walking towards the city to help rebuild society with their memorized wisdom. So this is it for today. We will continue to discuss the history of American English literature. Please stay connected with the discourse. Thanks and regards.